Hello, 3rd through 5th grade teachers, and welcome back to our learning series on unpacking the unit planning organizer for reading language arts that's helping us go through and study each of the components of the literacy block for better understanding. Today is session 5, I believe, on grammar. Like we've done before, we are going to start at the top here. Make sure that we know what's going on with the unit. In the overview, you will not find any particular information about grammar. So as we scroll down, again, in the essential questions and unit learning goals, you're not going to typically find any information about grammar. In the TEKS, high leverage TEKS and complementary TEKS, you will find some information as long as you know where to find it. So if I go to the writing section of the TEKS, I'm going to look for the 411D or the 11D. So 311D, 411D, 511D. And this will give you some hints about which grammar TEKS, these are the grammar TEKS, and which of them are going to be covered inside of that unit. If I keep on going, the next thing I'm going to come to that I want to pause at is the Reading Language Arts unit assessment. Now, for the unit assessment, I am going to find a whole section of the module assessment that is based on grammar. And so I'm going to scroll. The passages come first. There's 2 passages with questions. And I mean, sort of, we've got some grammar here, right? So when I'm responding to the extended constructor response, grammar is a piece of that. So using appropriate grammar in context. But the part that's going to relate most closely to the actual grammar lessons is going to be the 3rd passage in the module assessment or the unit assessment. So here I am at the 3rd passage, and I notice the 3rd passage, instead of labeled reading, is labeled writing, and it tells, and the structure of this passage alone tells me that it is a revising or an editing passage. And I know that because instead of the paragraphs being numbered like we might see on a reading passage, the sentences are numbered. And so that is a huge indicator of what is happening here. And you notice it's a very short passage. Look at this, only 2 little paragraphs, 15 sentences. And then there are a handful of questions that follow. Usually about 6 questions are going to be tied to this. And these 6 questions are going to come from the topics covered over the 3-week unit. So one of the things that throws kids off is the way these questions are asked. Like, what is the correct way to write sentence 3? If they don't know what that's talking about or how to go back, even if they know how to do the grammar skill, they might not understand what's going on. So exposure to this and just a simple explanation is usually all it takes, but you also have to make a little bit of time for that. It's important to notice that in the module assessment, one of the questions here is actually a short answer. This is typical of STAR as well, that there will be a short answer writing or grammar question. And this is actually a very common question that it says, which is combining the ideas in sentences 4 and 5. So just having kids familiar with some of that language is important. What changed? What's the correct way to write the sentences? All these topics through here would be what is going to be covered in the grammar units for this week, or for these couple of weeks of the unit. So take time when you're planning out your grammar to go take a look at those questions, see how they're being asked. Is there anything unusual in the questions that might throw students off? I know that I had an experience that I had some students all miss a question that I knew they knew the answer to, and it was because the word ideal was used in the question, and they were like, we don't know what ideal means. And I was like, oh my goodness. So you never know what's going to happen, so just having exposure to the language of the questions, the type of questions is really helpful. All right. Hopping down to the unit pacing guide, I see grammar coded in orange here. It is listed as 5 minutes of direct instruction. And I get the most comments about this, about how am I supposed to teach grammar in 5 minutes? How am I supposed to teach grammar in 5 minutes? And I want you to remember, just like with writing workshop, grammar is a writing skill. And so we need to have time that we are talking, but then we need to have time that students are actively practicing. So 5 minutes would be the max for my direct instruction piece, and then students are applying that through practice or through a game or through an activity. And that isn't time that I necessarily need to be standing over them. That's time that they need to be engaging with that task as students. So it frees me up. So remember, the minutes above are my direct teach minutes. So 5 minutes of direct instruction for the grammar. And I'm going to show you when we go into the lessons that that's not really an impossible task. Looking at what is scheduled here, each of these weeks has a focus. So week 3 is parts of a sentence. Week 4 is kinds of sentences. Week 5 is quotations. Some of these topics may be new, and some of them may be things that they've talked about for years and years and years, right? Kinds of sentences is something that's generally started in first grade, sometimes even in kindergarten. So this is also a contributing factor to that 5 minute. Sometimes it's just applying it with greater depth and complexity. As we've noticed before, I can either click directly in the unit pacing guide to get my link to that section, or I can open the document outline on the side. If you don't see it, click the hamburger and it will appear. And I'm looking for week 3 grammar, week 4 grammar, and week 5 grammar. I'm going to go ahead and hop down to that and investigate the grammar block. The grammar block starts the way all of our other ones have. It's coded in orange. It tells me this is week 3. The topic is grammar, that I have 5 minutes for direct instruction, and that it's aligned with week 1 of the What Makes Us Who We Are unit. Remember, HMH likes to call these modules, but there you go. And this week's topic is parts of a sentence. Following that, I see that the ELPs and the TEKs are listed for this particular unit. The vocabulary for this topic is listed. And what we've seen before, the weekly practice bundles. So remember, this is your quick one-stop shop for all of the content areas in that week. So this will be all of your links for vocabulary, reading, foundational skills, writing, grammar, are all in this one click. So there it is. Use that when you're planning, but don't make a copy for the whole group. And this top block is there every time. Then what follows is the same structure that we've seen before. The learning objective, the lesson plan that tells you what am I doing that day, what's the page number in HMH, a bulleted list of resources, and then the suggested formative assessment. And these stay pretty simple. When possible, we have tried to include more active learning activities in lieu of a worksheet, okay? So always be a critical consumer when you're looking at the worksheets and have that option there, right? Do I want students to write this in a grammar journal and really practice writing, or do I think that the worksheet provides the best practice, or do I have a game or activity that would go best? And each week follows a pretty similar pattern. There will be one topic that you're covering through the whole week. There'll be kind of like an intro, then it'll break it down a little bit, maybe break it down a little bit more, and then there's like an application day that's usually called using this topic in a specific way. So there's week 3. You can see it's simple and complete subjects and predicates. Then it's compound subjects and predicates. Then we're talking about subject-verb agreement, and then using sentences with subject-verb agreement. So just as an example, let's click on week 4, grammar. We can see the same top box with information, and then the daily lessons set up the same way. And this is types of sentences, and so I see that you're spending 2 days on declarative, or 1 day on declarative and interrogative sentences, 1 day on imperative and exclamatory sentences, one day on identifying kinds of sentences, right? So they're bringing it together and then applying it using different kinds of sentences. So this pattern follows each week. And I think that this also supports that 5-minute instructional routine because you're not changing topics each day. You're just kind of digging a little bit deeper, right? And so usually by day 3 and day 4, we're just applying it. I'm just giving you some time to apply it, and your lesson can get very, very short. So let's go back to week 3 and dig into one of the lessons. Let's look at day 4, form subject verb agreement. And I noticed that in the suggested formative assessment, it says complete items 1 through 4 on display and engage with the students. Have students find examples of sentences with present tense verbs and past tense verbs. Have pairs identify if the nouns are singular or plural. Remind them to look for compound subjects. So what I'm noticing is that there's no worksheet on this page, that they're using the display and engage. And that might be done orally or like on a index card or something. And then I noticed that this second part is kind of like having them find some examples. And what a great opportunity to have students go into their own writing, to have students go into the mentor text, to have students go into the reading text for the week and go find these things that other authors have already done, that other writers have already done, so that they are seeing these things in practice. So it's just what I'm thinking as I'm going to go into the page from HMH. And just like we saw with writing, when it opens up in this 2-page spread, but I know that I'm only doing subject-verb agreement, so I only need this 1 page. So I'm going to reduce my anxiety and just close it so that I can only see the 1 page. So this one is on subject-verb agreement. I see that the bulk of the lesson is right here in the center. The learning objectives and materials are on the left-hand side, along with some instructional vocabulary. And just like the writing, I noticed that these red titles kind of guide the lesson. So I'm going to connect and teach, and then engage and apply. Now, remember, HMH is going to give you a ton of stuff here. But as I look through the lesson, this is all scripted out. And then I notice right here, that is the exact same language that was on the formative assessment. Now, we haven't gotten to see this yet, but I notice that there's something listed just below that as what they suggest for application, which is have students complete the printable and have students edit a writing draft. Now, we removed that from our suggested formative assessment because your time is just precious and you do not have enough time to do all of that stuff. And we thought, you know what, this other activity is more engaging for students and will work just perfectly for what we're trying to do. All right, so your whole lesson that you would teach from is coming from this display and engage. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the display and engage so that I can look at it, but I'm going to skim this first, right? So I'm going to show it. I'm going to talk about verbs, showing action, right? It's kind of scripting out what's happening here. There's a think aloud that they've scripted for you. And then I'm going to complete items 1 through 4 with students. So I'm going to click on the display and engage. That's 1 through 4. But here is my instructional slide. So I would just need this 1 page up to help talk to students about subject-verb agreement, right? And we could read some of this together. We could keep it really simple. We could point out these examples. I could even have maybe this sentence written on a sentence strip and then we color code it or label it together. So there's a lot of opportunity here to take this and make it your own lesson. So like Dora walks in the garden, the boys walk in the garden, like noticing where the S is in all of this. And then the part that we were going to do together was answering 1 through 4 on here. And look, so I could either have students work together to write each of these sentences and use the correct verb tense, the present tense verb, or I could have them do both. I could have them work in a partner pair and figure it out and talk through the sentences and read the sentences and choose it. And then I could have them go write it down in their journal or on just a sheet of paper to turn in. That is a very low-key way to get that done. Now, if I really wanted to, I could go look at printable 1.1.3, and I noticed that it's basically the same information that was on the display and engage slide. They just use some different examples. And then again, we've got 5 examples of sentences to use. So this could be something that let's say when you see your students working on it, you have a group of kids that just doesn't seem to be getting this subject verb agreement piece. I could then have maybe a handful of these worksheets ready to go, and I could pull those kids in a small group and review the lesson in small group. But it's not necessary to have every single student do that worksheet page. And that would be it for your 5-minute lesson. So you just keep it pretty tight, right? You're just reviewing subject verb agreement, you're letting them talk together, and then have them practice, and then that's the end of that. So keep it pretty short. Just like most things, the first day of lessons on a new skill might take a tiny bit longer because you're introducing a skill. So just think about, if I have 5 minutes, maybe I used 8 on the first day, that by the time we get to the end, you're like, hey guys, look, we're doing using sentences with subject verb agreement. We just did this yesterday. What do you remember about it? Get a couple of examples from students, and they go, okay, now you're going to go work, and you give them the activity that you want them to complete. So that is the end of grammar. That is the end of this learning session on grammar. Thank you for engaging with this lesson, and be sure to join us back for the next part in our learning series, which will be on social studies.